hope, pray this is like not working today. But hi, Lance. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh my God, I feel like there's a delay, but welcome to Venture with Grace. To start the show, I would love for the audience to get to know you a little bit more. You started your career as a finance program manager at Twitter, and you have worked at like various different VC firms before joining DTCP. Maybe we could start with like what were some core lessons that you've learned early on in your career, kind of shaping into who you are today?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was a pretty non-linear path into venture. I feel like there's a couple different like ways to break into venture. I went to Berkeley and did my MBA, and it's often like you get asked by some of the kids there, like, "Oh, hey, what's like the quickest path?" I usually respond like, "Not what I did. Like the exact opposite of what I did is probably faster." But yeah, my background is actually kind of in humanities, so I was like a history undergrad, history major. I went to Scotland and studied and did my master's there. I was actually like thinking about going into law school. And so I enjoyed being abroad. I moved to Asia and taught English in Korea. And while I was out there, I was studying for my LSAT and was like continuing to take the test and was like, oh, I'll talk to a couple attorneys to kind of see what it's like day in the life kind of situation. It was like my first set of diligence, if you will. And then like 5 for 5, they were like, do not go to law school, which was a pretty funny sort of takeaway. And so I thought, oh, okay, oh shoot, I have like no job skills. I have, what am I going to do with my life? And I was like, I'll move to San Francisco. I moved from Korea back to San Francisco. And then just started kind of like, networking and working. I'd started kind of working at PG&E actually. And then the first kind of foray and like really interest into kind of like venture and tech was at Twitter. And so that was this sort of finance program manager role, and like for sure took a risk. It was like, I remember the interview, I was like, I have no qualifications for this job, but let me tell you why, you should hire me. Was effectively like the main takeaway. But then, started working there, and I really got exposed to one, like really interesting, motivated people tackling like a really big problem on like a mission critical platform. And then I started to interact kind of on this post acquisition integration side. And so I remember kind of the first kind of conversations with CEOs and early kind of tech employees and being like, oh, wow, this is super interesting. Like these people are really challenging sort of like the status quo, taking big risks, like, and really kind of moving things forward. And I just love this notion of like consistently problem solving. But I did know I wanted to kind of like continue my education. So I went to Berkeley and did my MBA, and that was a great way to kind of like branch into a variety of different things. And so from there, I had, a couple really pivotal internships. And since I didn't have like the traditional, I think, venture path of like, I went to, Ivy League school and then Stanford GSB or Harvard. And then, kind of just, parlayed that into a role. I really had to like network from the outside in, basically. And that effectively consisted of, I would say, driving top of funnel through mass emailings to venture people. You're probably well familiar with this. And holding coffees. Like people, I think one of the main lessons that I kind of learned was like the benefit of the Silicon Valley ecosystem is that people will consistently say yes to things they probably shouldn't. I remember like a number of coffees, I just was like, why are you taking this time to kind of spend time with me? And it was fantastic. Like I learned a lot, I tried to provide some value in those first kind of conversations around what I was interested in, what I thought they were interested in, and like leveraging the kind of Berkeley ecosystem and community as part of that. And so that was really, really interesting. From there, it turned into kind of this, one of the things my dad had told me when I was young was just basically like sweep the barbershop for free, like sweep the floor for free, which was basically means like you just go work and just go do it regardless of like compensation. So I remember the first couple kind of touch points with venture was literally me just being like, can I just show up at your office and help? And like, I'm willing to do anything and any tasks. And so that allowed kind of opening into another role at another venture capital fund and another role at Touchdown Ventures, this time paid, which was fantastic. And then finally over to DTCP, where I am today. So I've been here at DTCP since 2016. But yeah, I mean, I think the main takeaways was basically like the Silicon Valley kind of, benevolence of kind of, people helping other people out is real. Like the continued, like, you got to create your own luck a bit. And the way you create your own luck is kind of just keep continuing to push that rock up a hill. like consistently just going at it for a long period of time is really quite helpful. And then the other is just that like you hear in this kind of like universe, which is a bit bubbly for sure, things are different, which means that like you can kind of change your sort of trajectory and direction, and it's kind of up to you, you know, like however much you want to do it, the opportunity set is there. And so, yeah, I think those are kind of some of the main sort of like takeaways from early on, I would say, in like my career.
Totally. I have so many questions there.
Yeah.
So like one is like I wonder, since like I guess like you built the network in Berkeley. By the way, shout out to Sibo. Like she commented on like
Yeah.
we're both like Skydeck advisors. So like
Yeah.
she was like, I like that Skydeck advisor and doing Skydeck advisors.
Totally.
I wonder, like at the beginning, how did you really build up the Berkeley network? Because I think like in Silicon Valley, like I would claim that like everybody has some sort of networking, like Stanford, Berkeley. How do you kind of like set yourself apart from being in that unique network?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for a long time around the networks of these various sort of educational institutions and the pros and cons and sort of what's there. But I'll try and stay kind of more focused on Berkeley, just given the kind of fair kind of alumni here. But like, so I remember one of the first things I did again was like, I got involved in sort of like the kind of like venture capital club, if you will. And remember one of the things was like organizing this event. And what I got out of the event was literally a listserv of like email addresses for VCs. And like that was sort of that. And then I kind of filtered that via Berkeley related, was sort of like was like priority one. Priority two was just like the who's who and like who I would love to just kind of put an email out to and see if they would respond. And then three was basically just kind of everyone else. And the way I kind of like thought about it was like, hey, email is great, and then trying to get them to an in-person meeting was sort of like the kind of approach. But I feel like the Berkeley ecosystem is really interesting in the sense that like it just seems like underdeveloped to a certain extent. You know what I mean? It's like there's like and now is this moment I feel like in which they're having, and they've always had such really strong talent in like on the research side, of course, right? And like so now some fundamental companies of this era and of this like technological, innovation moment are all kind of Berkeley, right? I mean, you think of like Databricks and Ali and Ion Stoka. It's just like, man, like these companies and these people, and like even like Barry, the Berkeley AI Research Lab, and like the stuff that they're doing, Peter Abiel, and the work over in robotics. Like, man, there's just such great density of talent there. But I think, call it like, the pro of Berkeley is that they do like such good work. The con is like, I feel like they're so modest, like it's just like they do not like brush their shoulder off. Like I think some of the other institutions where it's like, man, why aren't we better prolific tweeters or something? Like do more, like do more connecting the kind of like business kids with the engineering talent that's kind of coming out of there. Do more to kind of continue to build those alumni relations kind of like later and deeper and things like that. I think Stanford's done a phenomenal job in that aspect. Like Harvard's done a phenomenal job in that aspect. And like, because every time you meet a kid from Berkeley or from Stanford or Harvard, they tell you immediately in the first sentence that they went to Stanford or Harvard. Whereas Berkeley kids don't do that, and that's one of the beauty of it. But nonetheless, like I feel like there is a little bit of like, hey, like shake the modesty off a little bit and like continue to do good work and just kind of like build. And this is like the moment for the university, just given the research areas and the talent that's kind of there.
For sure. Maybe we could start with like, because you have invested in so many very interesting companies like Groq, like Cohere, Arctic Wolf.
Yeah.
I feel like I can never pronounce their name, though they're very famous. And Fastly and various others top companies. Maybe we could talk about like DTCP in general and the like investing thesis that you've built throughout the journey.
Yeah, for sure. So we are kind of like a broader investment platform. I sit in our venture growth team effectively. We have a digital infrastructure fund that does purely like kind of like buys and builds and operates of data centers. And then additionally, we have this other group, which is really interesting in the sense that they are a CVC tied to Deutsche Telekom. And that was our initial investor. Basically, our original sole LP was Deutsche Telekom. We've brought in that LP base really significantly. Now we have about 30 different LPs, some strategic, but then also some just kind of institutional. But the thesis then when we kind of came together or sort of started was really around cloud transformation. It was like 2014, 15, they were founded in 2015. I joined in 2016, was really around all of the things that we're seeing in this like lift and shift of applications going from on-prem to the cloud. And like looking back, like it was such, and thinking about sort of like the investment approach, it was such a very different era than I think that where we sit to kind of today, given that there was like such clarity in this cycle of what good looks like. I'll never, like scale sort of like triple, double, 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 like, analogy and sort of like the work they did on the metrics, like applied extremely well to this kind of cohort of companies that were blossoming in this kind of time frame, because there was such maturity on like, this is like what you do on the infrastructure side. This is how you would operate and run a middleware company. This is how you operate and run an application company. And great looks like this as you grow to kind of IPO. And these are the very clear metrics you need to kind of IPO. And by the way, an IPO is going to be 100 to 150 million of revenue, like, crystal clear. So thus becomes this kind of benchmarking revolution in which a bunch of companies release benchmarks and sort of focused on that. And we did it as well. Like that is kind of core to our special sauce, was this thing we call the flight path, which is we analyze a company's trajectory on the path to a public offering. And in that era was Fastly, was Auth0, was Arctic Wolf Networks, and a number of other kind of really great companies that we invested into in this kind of, cloud era, if you will. I focus really exclusively on cybersecurity, cloud infrastructure, and AI infrastructure, and I lead all of our U.S. investments in those areas. It's been typically we look as of late, I would say, like where we are today, because venture is like a really interesting asset class in the sense that I think the name of the game is really kind of survival if you're a VC, and to survive you need to be both sticking to like your true kind of self, but you also, I think, need to play on the margin, because if you don't play on the margin, you are not going to continue to evolve. And the things that we evolve or that we invest in, they are evolving themselves. Like if we solely launched I only do, cloud lift and shift, like that matters, but a lot less now. If we solely launched just a crypto fund in kind of, 2017, 18, 19, like we probably would have died in 21 and 22. But it is important that you sort of stay true to what you do while continuing to play on these kind of edges. And that's what we do. We lead Series Bs in early growth. I think it is and early growth is, call it a couple million of ARR to kind of $10, $20 million of ARR. I think it's the most interesting time of a startup's like life, because they're experiencing massive complexity, which is, you found product market fit and you're trying to underwrite sort of, we are trying to underwrite execution risk, and they're trying to operate a very growing company, which is growing in three places. It is the product portfolio is changing pretty significantly. Often they add another product. You're growing headcount a lot, which means you're growing up and having middle management and these additional layers of kind of communication complexity. And then the last piece is geography. Like often folks have like a lighthouse account and they're thinking either Europe or Asia as part of that. Like it just so happens that we also have like amazing LPs who sit in Europe. And my main value proposition to CEOs and others is like, I just kind of want to help you sell more stuff in Europe. Like, I'm not going to be your product guy. I'm not going to be the one to help you hire your head of HR or what have you. I can help a little bit, but like, that's not my special secret sauce. But what I can do is open up doors to accounts to help you sell more stuff. And like that proposition, I think matters a lot to companies and CEOs at that point in time. It matters definitely a little bit later, but like a little bit like a seed, like, CEO, they care, but they have a lot of other things they also really need help on as well. And so that's where we play. And that's where I focus for sure.
Maybe we could talk about like, how do you meet Groq? What was the thesis back then? Like, I'm sure you probably evaluated their competitors as well.
Yeah, for sure. So we go really deep on like diligence. That's the other thing as well. It's like we're, we have like this, a little bit, this kind of like, not kind of like Oh yeah, I mean a bit of like almost like a private equity approach in the sense that we like really take to heart the sort of like diligence aspect, and like we're quite kind of thesis driven here in the U.S. Like recently, we've put forth kind of a number of different papers on AI security operation centers and the changes that we're seeing there. Next generation ITSM companies, kind of like ServiceNow, and the big acquisition that they did today with Armis that was kind of just announced, but looking at sort of this next set of challenges that are kind of growing there. Also, we put out a lot of, I think good work on sort of like the AI agent side. But for Groq specifically, like, every investment is the fruit of like multi-months of work, basically, that kind of leads into it. And so Groq was, we had taken a look of like where we think kind of value capture. One, we were recognizing where value capture was happening in this kind of ecosystem and the stage of the cycle, which is like absolutely picks and shovels. Like go look at Nvidia's price to see if like where the dollars are flowing, and then look at every recent large customer announcement, and everyone is just using those kind of like GPUs, and there's dollars flowing to this aspect of it. And so we thought we really like this sort of like bottom layer because one, we think there's a lot of value that's going to be captured there, and then two, just over time, like being a student of history has been kind of helpful in the sense that like you can kind of see these trends, and you have to kind of like look, historically, like it sure is odd that there's only one company that's capturing all that value. And do you think that one company will always capture the value kind of moving forward? Like, no, I think I think NVIDIA is going to continue to kind of do well and soak up a lot of capture. But man, I don't think they're really well positioned for where this is going, which is the inference market. And like when we started to look at this, problem from an inference market question, which is this a thing? Like, will this actually become something? And over, the resounding response was, close your eyes, but it's either 4 to 8 times bigger than the training market. And so, we're not great with math, but that's a lot. That's big. Like, and so we're like, okay, sounds good. So let's go look at these different companies and these different attempts at which folks are trying to tackle this problem. And so we started actually in the neocloud space. We had a lot of conversations with a number of the bigger players, CoreWeave and Lambda and Together and these other kind of great companies that are out there. But we never could get fully comfortable with the level of kind of differentiation that was sort of associated with those companies. And there was great kind of go-to-markets with a couple of them, and I think some really amazing sort of founders and good teams there. But like we just could never fully sort of go to bed at night and feel satisfied with how we felt like that would kind of play out. And so we thought, well, what is kind of like a really differentiated kind of company in the space? And it's one that we, and our answer, or what we thought, or what we think is kind of really interesting, is when you own your destiny. And when you own your destiny, you own from the silicon to the cloud. You own the entire stack. And that allows some really interesting things. One, on the unit economic side. Two, on the value that you can provide your end kind of customers and the end kind of control. And then three, I think if it's designed for that moment and designed specifically for the inference side, we think you can capture most, significantly more than others in the space. We talked to all of the other players. We had talked to Samba Nova, we had talked to Cerebras, and we talked to kind of, these other kind of players in the stack. But Groq themselves is just a really unique beast. I don't know if you've like seen Jonathan or kind of met other folks in the team, but really, excellent, strong, founder, really visionary out there in terms of what he's doing and what he is, trying to execute on. And I think this path in which they have, which is silicon to cloud, it's the most complex thing you can do, right? Like these are very different businesses and very different markets and things like that. But it takes a really sort of strong management and strong kind of ownership of that complexity and ability to navigate through that complexity to build a really big business. And so it's a big bet, and we understand it's a big bet, but we think the market and the upside is commensurate to that level of risk in which they're kind of taking. And we had a couple of touch points. We actually had passed on an earlier round. We validated teams, fantastic, markets, huge, like chip, it works, it's real. People want to buy this thing, but they were early in this go-to-market motion. And again, like getting back to what we really do best is focused on go-to-market. And like, we just couldn't really help or didn't really feel like we had an advantage as a VC. And I think that's important for other investors, which is like, how are you differentiated against your other folks? Like, how are you, why do you think what's your right to win this kind of deal effectively? And so we ended up not moving forward on that investment. But then we met, about 9 months later, right? And a lot had kind of changed. Like, they had entered into this kind of early growth phase on the go-to-market side. They had launched Groq Cloud, now with like 2.6, 2.7 million developers on the cloud, one of the largest ones there. They had like really built out their kind of go-to-market team, thinking about sovereign AI globally and being enablement partners for folks in Canada, folks in Europe, folks in Asia. It just really, really kind of changed the picture over that kind of like 12 months. And all of those things started to kind of really come together. And so that was kind of the Groq investment. We've done a lot with the team since then, since we announced the investment. Jonathan, kindly enough, was able to come speak at our AGM, which was fantastic. This nexus of hardware and software is of this moment as well. Like, this used to not matter in cloud. Everybody was, I don't care what you're running on. Like, just don't tell me, like, hide it. And actually, the better you hide it, the happier I am. But this moment, since we have this understanding on the data center side, and we have this understanding in more of the middleware kind of infrastructure, cloud infrastructure plus kind of application side, I think we have like a unique vision or unique eye here. And this pairs really well with what Groq is kind of trying to do. And additionally, we've kind of hosted a couple dinners with them so far, which have been fantastic, and brought a number of founders together to hear Sunny speak and others from the team, their CTO Chris Stevens as well, sort of talk about what they're doing. But yeah, I think a really interesting company, interesting bet.
I wonder, so like, I guess like the thing about Groq, since right now I feel like a lot of the cloud GPU providers, the hyperscalers, a lot of people are offering the inference as part of the service, like Nebius and some other ones. So how do you think about, you mentioned like the core differentiator is like they own the full stack. Can you elaborate on like, how is that kind of differentiate them versus like these like bigger ones like that, like, how do they kind of compete with the established like players in the market as well? Since I feel like, I don't know if I'm not sure if everybody owns the full stack, but I feel like some of them, like for example, Nebius and stuff, like everybody have like a lot of offerings for different.
Yeah, so like majority of those other sort of like neo clouds, they're all beholden, like all dollars just lead back to NVIDIA, right? Effectively. And so I think the
Isn't Cerebras like also building their own like the wafer?
Correct. Yeah. So Cerebrus's approach, or sort of like the main difference on the chip side, is that Cerebrus put everything effectively on one huge chip, which allows massive, massive speed because it's all sort of so tightly tied together. There's two kind of considerations there, and I think they would admit the same, which is that when building the chip itself, it's quite complex because it's one large chip that is highly integrated. And so fabrication, which is on the supply chain side, right, building the item itself, can be difficult to do at scale, or there could be issues at scale when kind of trying to do that. The other is that the price of the chip often kind of goes up kind of quite significantly because instead of building a bunch of small things, little things, you're building one large thing. And yes, it is extremely powerful. And often they are like literally the fastest speed to token from all of these sort of like next gen kind of like folks. But again, I think kind of Groq's kind of like main piece here is twofold. One, it's a unified experience between how tightly that they built the software, which is really the hard thing here. And like Jonathan has talked about this a number of times, it was like the first thing they started with was building the software side. And in fact, that's NVIDIA's like, the core secret sauce is CUDA, right? Is like they constantly talk about sort of like the developer ecosystem and love and how they build within sort of CUDA and how it relates to the holding patterns and the moat in which they have. And so, Jonathan and team have spent a lot of time on basically building out the compiler and the other pieces of software associated with the chip itself. And then they built a chip for the moment, right? They built a I don't know, kind of like a great analogy, but they built effectively this sort of like Ferrari that is extremely fast, but really cheap. So I guess what's a really fast kind of like cheap car, but like they built that. And so I think the sell and the pitch and difference to other folks when they're thinking about building out data centers, and the folks that are doing that are either on the are kind of a couple fold. One is on the enterprise side, where we are seeing customers retrench, where historically it was all someone else go run this, which is where the most neoclouds fit, right? Which is offering their services to other large enterprises and doing it, out of house. Whereas we're seeing customers, large customers, going to Groq and saying, we want to deploy in house and own this because and make sure we have we can reduce the economics as much. When you deploy an on-prem model or in a virtual private cloud, the inference cost is eaten by that customer. So like, if you and I build a company and we ship, on-prem models, the customers we sell to are responsible for the inference costs. They don't care. Like, as us, the model company, we don't kind of care. So when we launch it in-house, you do that. So enterprises are now very, very focused on a couple things. One, performance, but two, unit economics and the cost of what that is. And this is where Groq operates, which is, I would think they would also say that, like, you can't just be the fastest. You have to be really, really effective on the price side. And so I think that's kind of like the main sort of like piece of sort of differentiation. The other is that I think that like when we had looked at a number of these other clouds, we felt like, everyone was kind of pitching next gen AWS. It was like, hey, we're going to build this sort of like developer ecosystem, what have you. Man, that's hard. Like, it is hard, and you have to, I think, have. We saw a lot of kind of proof points or early kind of proof points within the sort of like Groq team and Groq ecosystem that gave us credence to kind of believe that they would be able to kind of execute on this. At the end of the day, though, like, the market is so big, like, it is massive. It really is. There's been retrenchment on the public side. We've seen CoreWeave kind of like lose a bunch of value. Like Lambda Labs was like talking about going public, but maybe kind of like raising sort of like a private round. Like, there's been a little bit of, and as these build outs of data centers get delayed, like, there's been more questions. Oracle was in the news recently with like a bunch of stuff that they had to push some of the OpenAI stuff. And then we saw some retrenchment back on their kind of like price as well. But, and this is the reality. Like, when you, like, I think people are starting to understand, like, building software is really easy. Putting a shovel in the ground and like going to PG&E and being like, could you supply, X amount of gigawatts or megawatts of power? And they're like, yeah, in 3 years, absolutely, we're happy to do that. And they're like, no, we need this like right now. That there are going to be some delays and some hiccups, but yeah, so it's gonna be a long road, but we think that this is like a really great opportunity.
For sure. Can we talk about the future of these like neo clouds? And since we're talking about Groq, like you mentioned about like there's I would say a few things. One is like the full stack aspect of it, and then the other part is like they're not really focusing on like building the developer ecosystem, but focusing on like other stuff that differentiate them, whether it's like R&D or like I guess like improving the software side of things.
Yeah.
And I wonder, so like, do you feel like in the future there will be like one major player like an AWS to like the traditional SaaS company, or do you feel like there will be multiplayer game that also like is a Firework also building something like Groq as well?
Yeah, there's a bunch of these. There's Fireworks. There was Base 10. There is another one. I think Napton.ai got recently kind of acquired. But there was a number of these different kind of like players, and there's also some next gen ones. Fall.ai is a specific kind of player. Runware is kind of a competitor to Fall. Which
we had Runware on our last week. Yeah,
exactly. And so they offer sort of a very similar kind of like this inference cloud that's focused on a very specific type of models. And so there's a couple differences for these kind of clouds. One is the models they offer, right? Which is, do you offer closed sourced, open sourced models, some selection of the two? Do you offer some subset of those models, whether they be either multimodal, multilingual, or very focused in video or graphics or something like that? That's the kind of Falls and Runways of the world. Or are you more of a generalized platform? The second is sort of what's your value proposition? And like often they are just, we are cheaper is usually the sell. Like so speed, which you can spin up a GPU and availability effectively is kind of that. The other piece that they always usually will talk about is around reliability, right? Because if you're trying to train a model or try and build something and it continually goes down, like not good. The last piece that we're kind of seeing is on the sovereign side, which is like regional hubs of these neo clouds that are starting to emerge. like in scale, raised a lot of capital in Europe, kind of was anointed, via sort of NVIDIA and a big investment there. Asia has their own kind of a couple kind of like neoclouds that are popping up. We just talked to one a couple of weeks ago as that kind of part there. And then here in the US, of course, there's, we've talked about kind of like a couple of the other ones. And so I think your question was around, how do I think this market will like evolve, or like who will kind of like win in this sort of like ecosystem? I think the one conversation we're not kind of like didn't bring up is like how well positioned the big hyperscalers are. Like this is a big boys game. And by that, I mean, and girls game, but I mean, you need a lot of capital to make this happen. And Google has built a beautiful like business that puts off so much cash that they can take and invest long-term for these risks. Amazon, beautiful business that puts off a bunch of cash that they can invest heavily into this. Microsoft as well. The one that I'm like a little questioning is actually Meta. Like they have like a really good business, but like if things fall short on the AI side for these big three kind of like hyperscalers, you can also throw Oracle in there. They can often turn these data center builds and buys and runs into cloud infrastructure. And like it clearly maps directly to what the business they're doing. That's not the case for Meta, but you do have Mark and his willingness to kind of take risk and being sort of a founder at the helm of a business that he's ran for so long, and the risk taking that he wants to do there. So I think like you have the hyperscalers. They're going to continue to I think do really well here because they're well suited. They have the talent, they have the money, and they have the kind of patience and capital to kind of continue to invest in this stuff. On the next gen side, I think there's going to be a lot of folks that run into these big boys that are going to grow to a certain size and then continue to hit the kind of like the big cloud providers, unless you partner with them and play well. And I think that's where CoreWeave has done a good job, which is like signing big contracts for Microsoft and Google and these others. Go ahead.
I think like CoreWeave's 70% of revenue are all coming from Microsoft. Like they only have like 10 clients or something crazy. So, and then like obviously there's like the Nebius, like Nebius. I feel like they're doing really well. I mean, I'm a fan of Nebius because of like there are amazing sponsor kind of collaborator.
There you go.
I feel like they're doing a really great job on like capturing people from like startup perspective, or like just like from like kind of growing from the beginning to like the end. I feel like which approach do you think is better? It's not like we only have 10 clients, but they're like huge tech company versus like we have like 1 million clients from smaller sizes to larger sizes. Like, but it's like the annual contract value is not like as significant as like wow, these big.
Yeah. I think this actually touches on something that we've given a lot of thought and we believe like really strongly, like at DTCP, which is effectively the importance in an AI native world of distribution is paramount relative to other sort of pieces of differentiation or other modes. Much more so, and this has changed over the last kind of 12 to 18 months versus before. And like what I mean by that is like even in a software world, like stepping back from the neocloud stuff, in a software world, code, features, and these other things, you could buy some moat and some kind of ability. But in this new world in which code can be generated at the click of a button, and like features can be effectively commodities because they can immediately be copied by your competitor, the real differentiation sits in domain expertise, a bit in data, but that even today hasn't really come to fruition. Like I think the data piece will matter, but it doesn't matter as much right now because we're just in the land grab side. But it matters in distribution. Like whoever has the best distribution muscle and whoever can get to their customers first and fastest and make the most amount of noise in doing so, we're often seeing kind of breakout. We saw this with a couple kind of vertical apps, whether it's like Harvey or even Glean on the enterprise search side, or some of these other companies in which are kind of like a bridge and kind of like the metal transcribing side, but also in the neocloud space. And I think what you're seeing is exactly this question, what you're saying, which is what's happening in real time, this battle between it's way better to go deep with 5 to 10 customers or 50 customers, or do we try and like take over the big market of like developer focused and go from there. I think if you look at public companies as an allegory, as like an analogy, it's rare to see public companies with such customer concentration and such high ACVs. Historically, it was only Viva, like the company that was sort of like related to Salesforce. They had massive contracts and few customers. CoreWeave is in that sort of like an anomaly. I think I could say that like we could be like not fair, given that like we're at a different stage of a tech cycle, and that like the tech cycle that we had seen in the past of all of these great SaaS companies were in that kind of, we had ACVs of signing customers of 100 to kind of a couple $100,000, and it was rinse and repeat and stamp and what have you. I do think that like getting, you need to like be able to find some repeatability and that motion of only signing a couple very big customers. It's hard to kind of get there given the sort of like ebbs and flows of kind of like that business, and that you need to, I think, have developer love and the developer like adoption, given I think the importance of this sort of of like the AI native moment. And then additionally, I think you need to kind of continue executing this like mid-market to kind of like enterprise side. Right now, the buyers of these big contracts, particularly on the sovereign AI side, are big, are huge and small, and want to spend a lot of money and kind of consolidate. But at the end of the day, I think like they could also like realize, oh, we don't also want to be locked in. Like when you sign a $50 million contract or $30 million contract, like there will be a point in time of this kind of AI cycle in which that is not interesting, because they want optionality. And so I think that could be one of the kind of pieces that come out of play here.
I really like what you said about like, it is about like, in the end of the day, it's like about developer love and adoption. Speaking of that, like what should the go-to-market process be like for these like cloud GPUs or like just like hyperscalers? Like how should they kind of deploy, like first of all, like how do you identify the company that will actually become huge? And like is that like through like VC partnerships, or like how do people currently like go to market?
Yeah.
And then I have like 5 follow-up questions, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, so again, like I think if we just like recognize a couple truths, which is like the power of the CSPs today, like they are huge and they're strong. Like I think going head to head in markets that they are also kind of competing with is, again, since we're in this big boys big girls game, like it's kind of a fool's errand. And that like if you don't have like the capital support to kind of continue in that, it's quite difficult. And like you need a lot of money to not just purchase the GPUs, but to run the platform and to run this kind of very complicated strategy. And it's hard to kind of keep these developers long term. And like that's the thing that we're seeing a lot with these neoclouds, which is like, oh yeah, we have like, customers deploying on all of them and then just picking which one's kind of cheaper for the week or the day or what have you, and then moving and shuffling and things like that. So it's hard to kind of like hold folks. And so I think like, that makes our job, I think, a little bit harder, because there is such like, it's such an interesting moment in time in which there's like a lot of experimentation effectively that's happening, both on the buyer side and the startup side, and lack of kind of clarity of like what exactly is the stack and the approach.
I guess like another question I had was like, okay, so maybe going back to the investing end. So like obviously Groq is like one of your investments that's like doing really well, as well as like, you guys invest in Cohere at a very early stage. Maybe we could also talk about like the journey of like winning these deals, because those are hot deals, right? So like how do you typically go about like, encountering the company to like actually put money in?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different things that I think like really matter. And like venture is an interesting game in the sense that we are it's kind of odd. Like the way it's like operated and done is really it was like there's some moments in which I was like, that's just so weird. Like I think it's odd that in like doing deal diligence on a company, like we'll spend a month or two like digging really deep. Very little of that information is therefore shared with the company at the end of the day. It's like we'll go do a bunch of work, they'll share a bunch of information, I go sit in a room, go talk to a bunch of different people to come to a conclusion, and then be like, hey, I just spent 2 months of my life focused on this, your market's too small, thank you. Like weird. Like what a weird thing. So like what we've been doing here at DTCP is effectively, I think we do really good work, and we try and be as transparent as possible with the companies at the end of the day, which effectively means me sitting down with the CEOs mid-diligence and being like, hey, here we are. Like I have, we like, this is literally my memo, or this is literally what we like just did. These are the biggest risks that after talking to 25, this is your biggest challenges. How are you thinking about this, and this? And there's two things that occur. One, you have a very open and transparent conversation around the business. And hopefully two, I think the founder can see that we're not tourists. Like, we're not just sending 100 emails, responding to one, saying we're getting into a data room and then not moving forward and like not responding. We really are trying to understand the problem, and it's extremely helpful to have them as a sounding board. It may not mean that at the end of that meeting that I'm like, oh yeah, you convinced me, we're good. I could still be like, I still have reservations and don't think we can kind of get there, whether on the economic side or just on the core kind of conviction side. But we've had a very honest conversation, and I feel like in dating, that's kind of what I want. I want a real conversation with someone to have like a very to walk away. So I think we try and be very transparent and very communicative around the work that we're doing. One, two is we try and be actually like value add, like a lot of people say it, and it's like kind of this big joke of everyone in a Patagonia vest talking about how they can help or whatever. It was like, I actually don't think it's that hard. I think it's sort of this Disney golden rule stuff that like we all learned watching Disney movies, which is like, just do what you say. Is like, you want to be a great VC, do what you say, continue to ask questions, and then and be responsive. Like if folks just kind of did this bare stuff, like I think there would be a lot less, like not angst, but like, the joke would kind of like go a little bit less, There's obviously different incentives and people, there's different kind of like politics involved and all that stuff. I get it. But like the way we try and run things, and I think the way that we try and like operate is like, be transparent, be communicative, follow up on and say what you're going to do, and actually help. Like if at this moment they really care about introductions, how can we be helpful on the introduction side? Like lean in, to steal sort of, Sheryl Sandberg's kind of reference there, like just be kind of present. It's hard. We can do this at this stage. Like I get it if you're a seed investor and you have 100 different companies, but the things that matter here is less like is less about we're starting to see what we know the good companies are. There's already kind of a pecking order, if you will, or starting to kind of emerge. And so I think that stuff resonates a bit more for this. So this is definitely this advice, if you will, is like, and our opinion is focused on this stage. But yeah. And the other is that like, I don't know. I would love to start a venture capital fund called like Good Guy Ventures or something. Like, just be a good person. Like, like I don't know. Like, it's not that like that crazy. You know what I mean? Like, take meetings that like be Silicon Valley. Take meetings you probably shouldn't. Try and be helpful that to others. You never know when it's going to come back. You're going to have to lean on these folks at some point in time. Like, put good vibes into the ecosystem, and I guarantee it'll come back. Like.
Oh my God. I love the thinking framework though. I love the philosophy of like the Good Guy Ventures, but I don't know if I would trust a guy who called himself Good Guy Ventures.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. That'd be like a guy on the side of the road who's like, yeah, it's like, please stop, good guy, good guy.
Oh God. So speaking of that, like I wanted to learn more about like, so what's your typical check size and like what kind of ownership are you trying to target? And then is there like any valuation gaps?
Yeah.
Or like a valuation like benchmark that you guys are using to like evaluate? Because nowadays I feel like all the AI companies are like in the billions, regardless of how many employees they have or how much they have grown.
Yeah, for sure. So a couple kind of like, so we invest typically, ideally we're doing sort of $20 to $30 million per investment. Often we're landing with like $15 to $20 million, sometimes $25 million in kind of first check in, with a bit sort of open for reserves kind of on these kind of future funding rounds. What does that mean from like an ownership perspective? Like it ranges. Again, like 80% of the time we're trying to invest in a Series B, but sometimes we'll invest much later and get way less kind of ownership. And other times we're being flexible as we think about sort of Series A companies that we think are going to be interesting. And so that is and often I'm not writing a $20 million check into a Series A company, but to what we're seeing in this AI, native moment, and for specific to valuations, is that like they can run away really quickly. But some of it's really justified. Again, like we've seen companies who have hit this like distribution curve and that are scaling from 0 to 10, 0 to 20, 0 to 30 in really fast order. if they don't need a B because they go straight from a Series A to a Series C in a valuation perspective side, like what's our right to win or play in that kind of like moment? And so again, I think that's why it's important to be kind of flexible. So sometimes we are putting kind of smaller checks into these earlier stage companies because it is growing so fast, and it is in either a sector or or we think there's going to be a lot of kind of like speed on the valuation side. Again, I think it's just trying to be sort of like in tune with where we think the market's going. On the valuation benchmarks, like, I mean, there's, you can kind of Google a lot of that. I don't really, I think ascribe to kind of like where the metrics are. I know that like people will pay up for really good teams. Entry price for some of these kind of like models, even without model companies or frontier labs, like without a company and it's just people, yeah, we're seeing sort of these billion-dollar valuations kind of thrown around with like not much there, and even kind of like more than that. Is that sustainable? Like, are we in a moment of like hype or what have you? Like, I think two things can be true. I think like people can get over their skis. I think VCs chasing deals can be a problem and an additional kind of like issue catalyst in this ecosystem in which we're kind of dumping more money into companies that probably don't need it, and giving founders $500 million. And guess what they're going to do? They're going to go spend $500 million because, they now are sitting on a huge valuation. Founders themselves are getting like faced with like a really difficult like decision point, which is effectively, if I don't take this capital, it's kind of what we saw in 21 and 22 or 20, which was like, if I don't take this capital, you're going to go to my competitor and go give them this check. And you're like going to anoint a king, like, quite early on. And so as a CEO, I mean, I think this valuation is crazy. This really like is really a hard kind of hurdle for me to kind of clear. But like, I can cash out a little bit. I could, this would be good for the employees. Like we'll have a bunch of press. Like I can get the rationale, but I think people should continue to be like, try and build long-term sustainable businesses that should be around a while. Don't get over your skis on the valuation side. Momentum matters though, like momentum of raising rounds, momentum for customers and conversation. But like, doing so in a trajectory that makes sense is good. So there aren't sort of specific benchmarks. We're open to play on kind of like the valuation side. We want to partner with great teams wherever they sit. And people do really matter. I was at a VC dinner we hosted, and like the amount of times it just came back to people, like over and over, of like what was the difference for a number of these companies. It just literally came back to like people, and not the problem that they were focused on or what have you, but it was this unique combination of the time and the people who were at that moment and like really kind of addressing it and how they worked kind of together. But yeah.
I love that. I feel like in the end of the day, everything is coming down to people. And speaking of people, I feel like AI is creating threats every day. So you have invested in um, Arctic Wolf. I
Yeah.
can't really pronounce them, but like, okay, so it is a very famous like cybersecurity company. It's valued
Yeah.
at like $4.3 billion
Yeah.
today. So maybe we could talk about like how do you encounter that company, and then what's your
Yeah.
thesis for security tech in general?
Yeah, for sure. And there's actually a new investment we did that we announced a couple of weeks ago, a company called 10x.ai, that is an amazing company in a very similar space, which is effectively next gen MDR, like managed detection and response. And like the thesis for this kind of category, and it was kind of very similar to Arctic Wolf, which is that like security is hard, man. Like it's hard. Like there's way too many attackers. There's way too few resources, both on the people who are trying to manage and understand these alerts and triage these problems that are coming into organizations, along with budgets. Like budgets like are kind of stagnant. Yeah, they continue to buy a bunch of different tools and they're trying to kind of figure it out. But like, man, it's tough. And often for a lot of these companies, like the secret to cyber is that they want a solution. Like these customers, they want a solution. They don't want another tool set. Like they want something to be packaged in a bow. Speaking of Christmas coming up, like wrapped in a present with a bow on it, with a little card that says like, you are safe. We figured this out. Here you go. The 10x piece, which I think is really important, and Arctic Wolf is starting to lean this in as well, is that if you think about where AI has worked really well, and in large language models, specifically in agents as well, is human in the loop. Like when you have a person, like we will get there to multi-agent systems that are multi-step, that are doing amazing stuff. Like, I don't know how to tell everybody, we're just not there. Like we're not there. Like go talk to an enterprise, go talk to a CIO, go talk to developers. Like it's just not happening. Like shocker, like it's just not there. We will get there. Like the models will get that good. Like this will happen very, very soon. There will be a standardization on the tool set and the way these things communicate. Like it's going to work. But today, and I think what's going to continue to be really important is having someone who is leveraging this tool set to make themselves a 10x employee and a 10x individual. And in the security context, you cannot have something like a large language model that is probabilistically figuring things out versus a deterministic system. You need a deterministic outcome. It needs to either be that is a yes or a no, like whether like we are either going to shut off your access or not. And like we can't be like, oh well, we kind of think it is, and make it sound like Shakespeare when you do that. Like it's just not going to work. And so 10x and Arctic Wolf they pair this person with these really amazing AI tools, and you're seeing amazing outcomes, like extremely strong ability to tackle low level problems autonomously. And then on the higher sort of like more larger issues, it's exactly how we use AI today, which is like, hey, I have like, help me with this. Okay, interesting. Be a thought partner with this. Great. And the cyber context is no different, as they like leverage this interesting tool set to tackle like the scale of these problems at a degree that historically just we're not able to do.
For sure. I guess let's talk about like what you said about 10x.ai.
Yeah.
How are they? You were saying that they are reinventing MDR. Maybe we could talk about the landscape. Like, what does the current landscape look like, and then how are they kind of reinventing it?
Yeah, for sure. So the current landscape is actually a lot of this came out and around sort of like Arctic Wolf time. They remain one of the survivors, if you will, or like the one of the most important platforms. And I would say MDR is kind of transformed now to just a general term, which is like security operations. And like, Arctic Wolf is executing that path, which is they provide this MDR service. There's a variety of other modules in which they can provide to their customers, which is kind of like security awareness training, endpoint detection, a number of different things to tackle an enterprise's end-to-end security operations center. How do they provide you an end-to-end SOC and an end-to-end kind of experience? There was Expel and Red Canary and a couple of these other folks that had come up in and around the same time as Arctic Wolf that were doing this very similar thing, which is we'll provide you this platform in which you can operate in. Let me plug in all your data, and then our team is going to manage that for you. So you get this beautiful present with a bow on it that just says, focus on these 5 things. Like, I'm Bob, I sit in Kansas, like you are a hospital in Illinois. You don't have the team or talent to do it. Bob's going to help you. Here's the 5 things to kind of focus on. What we're seeing today, though, is fast forward kind of 10, 15 years. One, the CSPs have launched their own security. Like, Google SecOps, at least with Google Chronicle, Google SecOps is real. Like they're selling a bunch of stuff. Microsoft's security products, real, strong, great attachment on the distribution side and the go-to-market side. And why are they doing so well? And like, why is it hard to build a standalone company, even though Arctic Wolf's done a fantastic job kind of doing this? It's expensive. Again, like getting back to the money piece, like you have to buy and acquire these modules. You have to build these, you have to provide a full breadth platform, right? This is the platformization that we've seen really kind of like crystallize like here. And where does 10X kind of, how do they differ? What's interesting about them is like, they bolt on atop these big platforms. So they leverage the strengths and the dollars that have been spent by these CSPs to build these capabilities, and they leverage already the strength of some of these go-to-market like folks, right? They're partnering with these folks as opposed to competing with them. And what do they bring? Totally, complete agentic AI native product, right? They bring, again, this domain expertise and AI native component versus Google trying to build this mishmash of things and trying to kind of present it as a holistic solution. And then the other piece that like 10X provides is the people. Like, Google's not going to sell you a person or like let you kind of like leverage that kind of piece, right? This is where 10X can kind of be really helpful from that aspect. And so that's how they kind of differentiate, right? They have you end up getting with that person as well, great access to your customer. They're kind of like a forward deployed engineer in that aspect. Like they are scouting upsell opportunities and like other ways to kind of sell more to your customer. And then they're also solving issues for them on the day, adding a lot of value. And so it's an interesting thing because, again, historically, we got so away from like people doing work, or, like real people. Managed services was like a dirty word. Hardware was a dirty word, 10, 15 years ago. And it's like, we're back, like hardware is not dirty. Like, we just did, Groq, and it's kind of really interesting chip company. There's constantly everyday news on sort of new silicon kind of advances and things like that. People care about that stuff. And then additionally, services are cool again. Forward deploy engineers are cool again, right? And like historically, it's just like not the case in the cloud era, if you will, or the SaaS era.
Speaking of, I guess like build your own knowledge base, like how do you typically like inform yourself with the newest trends, or like
Yeah.
how long does it take you to actually write a check from like, first time meeting the founder to,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, like you would do all the research and then you really go into ask the founder very specific
Yeah.
questions about their, how they think about the certain problem. Like, how do you really get comfortable with like the ambiguity? Because I think like maybe at later stage there's a lot more data that you could like really lean into, but like still like there's so many things that like you could just not control in general. Like what kind of risk are you willing to take versus not?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good question. And again, I'll speak from a complete opinionated kind of perspective, but like, I think we sit at this really neat intersection in which we have some data, but there's still a ton of kind of gut, if you will. Like historically, it'd be called like the George Bush era of like of making decisions, right? Which was basically like how like there's these like early signals or kind of like qualitative information that kind of like becomes really important. So like soup to nuts, we try and invest within and stay extremely current with kind of like the decision making of the time. So like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sure, yeah, that's all kind of like very reasonable. We can like execute in that time frame. We're not going to make a decision in a day. Like I think it's irresponsible to kind of like do that stuff. But if we want a compressed cycle, or we know something's going to be especially competitive because of either talent density of this company or sort of excitement of the sector or what have you, this is where this work again, like you got to do the work. We do it. We try and do it ahead of time. And we, think we are like, I kind of see my job as trying to recognize these signals coming out of seed and series A, not just companies, but sectors that are starting to emerge, and thinking like, oh, that's interesting. Like, let's start like investigating this piece a little bit. Like, let's start talking to companies and buyers and understand, like, does this really matter? And then by the time like get a very clear understanding of like this stratification within markets, and be like, okay, and have our thesis. Like, it's not just like, let's just go do some research. It's like, okay, knowing what we've learned, what's a great company in this space? Like, close your eyes, let's have Lance's great company view. Okay. And then compare it against the companies that are out there, and then go from there. And so I think that's how we try and kind of like do our work, which is like being more thesis driven, doing the work up front, talking to buyers, figuring out what we think looks great, what does great look like, and then going from there. There is already some early kind of even kingmakers and momentum, stuff that happens, right around when we invest. But again, sometimes I don't think that can also go away, whether burn too much money or don't kind of like, aren't executed on the distribution side.
For sure. I want to be mindful of time. Maybe we wrap with a quick 1 minute fire round for you.
Yeah.
What's your favorite book?
Oh, East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Actually, I'm rereading it. I try and reread it once a year. Yeah. Anyways, I love California. I'm like a history buff, and like the Salinas Valley and the prose that he uses there. He's just a fantastic writer, and so I try and do that. I also my thesis was on Thomas Paine, and so he wrote a book called Common Sense. I've been watching the Ken Burns Revolutionary War documentary, and so I really like the sort of ideals that were put forth there, which are really interesting. And if you want an early badass in like the 1700s, Thomas Paine was it. He basically was like, let's overthrow a king, in which nobody was ever talking about that stuff. So a true like.
Oh my god, sorry.
Okay.
Whenever the most important conversation I'm having, there's always an interruption. Oh my god, this needs to stop. I'm sorry. Like I should.
You're good.
Okay, yeah. I would totally check that out. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
What's that?
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Oh wow. Does this include individuals that have like that are dead, basically, or is it just present?
It's your party.
It's my party. Oh, amazing. So there's like a really interesting quote from Eleanor Roosevelt who said that like great minds talk about ideas, like good minds talk about events, and weak minds talk about people. And so I would want a collection of individuals that is a discussion of ideas. And so I think that's a combination of some like tech, luminaries, if you will, along with some historical figures. Like again, this is a bent from my history days, but like I think Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were amazing people, along with and nuanced, of course. But them, Thomas Paine would be really interesting, and I would love a mix of like the Sam Altmans of the world, if you will, to bring kind of like that context and like historical, technical piece into it as well. So it'd be a mix of sort of past and present, I think.
Love that. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Oh wow, that's a really good question. I think there's two people that I would sort of say. One is an individual in venture. His name's Ben. Shout out to Ben. He took like it was the first break. Like I think gave me my first like internship, and like we remain extremely close today. He's a managing partner and Next Gen Venture Partners. Shout out to them. They have a really interesting, unique, differentiated model focused at seed. He was one of the people who I sat in front of, was like, I have no skills, or like, I have no qualifications for this. I have skills, just no qualifications for your job. And he said, no problem. Like, let's see you on Monday. Let's like start working together and try and figure this out. And so I think Ben was one of the big persons there, for sure.
Love that. Where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work, like, to be honest, my greatest accomplishment to date is having two amazing sons and a wife. So usually I'm hanging out with my kids somewhere. So shout out to San Francisco Parks and Rec. I'm usually at a park somewhere with them, running around. We try and get out of the city a bit. I think we live in a beautiful area. California is amazing, but the bubble of San Francisco is strong. So I encourage everyone to leave the bubble sometimes, to go to real places and real towns to interact with, with other people. And so I grew up in a really rural area. I try and take them back to the mountains where I grew up quite a bit and get out in nature. It's really resetting and really important. But yeah, that's usually where you find me, is with my kids somewhere, ideally in some kind of small mountain town.
Love that. Well, Lance, thank you so much for coming onto the show today. It was such a fun conversation.
It was great. Thank you so much, Grace. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. I know we're around the corner. I should have wore like a Santa hat or something, I feel like. But anyways, this was fun. Hope you have a great holiday.
Thank you. You too. Let me quickly end stream.